president, but let's have a conversation now. I do understand Zuko is now with us on the line. Zuko, thank you so much for your time this afternoon. Firstly, let's talk about the party's reaction to the new cabinet.
Thank you very much, Bongiwe, for having me. The ANC yesterday did express its welcome of this executive as announced by President Cyril Ramaphosa. We acknowledge the importance of the role played by all the political parties that were able to negotiate and arrive at an agreement that finally gave South Africa the opportunity to see the national executive that will be responsible for public policy and the affairs of the country for the next 5 years. And we do implore all parties that have signed up to the membership of the GNU by acceding to the statement of intent that they have to hit the ground running and do their best to live up to the expectations that the people of South Africa have for them.
When you listen to the Democratic Alliance, for example, we just spoke to Mr. Tony Leon, he talks about the issues of proportionality. For example, he's saying that there was around 55% in order to be able to accommodate more of the ANC, members as well, and in order for them to get into ministry and deputy ministry positions. And he says that this was to try and manage some of the dynamics that are currently taking place behind closed doors within the party, and that they got about 18%, which is way less than what they would have, of course, been calling for. So what does the ANC then say to some of these issues of proportionality that are being raised, and also the assertions that things could be tough behind closed doors?
Two things. It's disingenuous to ascribe the proportionality outcome of the cabinet to supposed differences within the ANC. There is no backwheeling and dealing that's happening in the ANC that was being accommodated. The understanding of the ANC, which I thought was a shared understanding by all political parties, was that the principles that are reflected in the cabinet were actually canvassed and agreed to by all negotiators during the process that produced the agreement that the president acted on the basis of. There was hardly anything that had to do with the ANC dynamics. In fact, it is public knowledge through a series of correspondences from the Democratic Alliance to the ANC and to the president that the issue of the number of cabinet seats that the DA would be given was agreed to between the ANC, the president, and the Democratic Alliance. So if the argument is that they feel underrepresented, that argument should have been made with the negotiators. And it's to hold this political conversation in bad faith to suddenly spring it up now once the announcement has been made. But the leadership of the DA was actually in conversation with the leadership of the ANC and the President of the Republic.
So given the fact that there were calls for a much more leaner and meaner cabinet, but now we're looking at some of the portfolios, they have about 2 deputy ministers. Is it the ANC's view? I know it's the prerogative of the president, but does the ANC think that we need all of them?
In fact, the president was quite forthcoming on this point yesterday in the context of the announcement. The president says he is the one who voluntarily made the point that he would love to have a much smaller and leaner cabinet. But he also makes the point that this must be understood in the context of a new reality that was brought about by the election results. It's not so much that the president said, I want a bigger cabinet. His instinctive position, which the ANC shared, was that you could do with a leaner cabinet. But that was assuming that the ANC would be acting alone in deciding on what the cabinet ought to look like. So in order to accommodate the 11 political parties that signed up to the government of national unity, the president needed to find a creative way to accommodate broadly the will of the South African people as reflected by the distribution of votes in the National Assembly. And that, unfortunately, had to push him to a corner where he had to expand the cabinet. But let's make also the point that the issue about the leaner cabinet was in the context of really the number of departments that was needed. What the president has had to do now was to increase the number of ministries from 28 to 32. So we're talking about an addition of 4. So I want us to have a proportionally measured outrage, even if there were to be such, so that the use of the notion of bloating must be measured in scale. But that scale must also be understood to be a function of the pressured moment in which this government was being produced, and that it had to include and represent as broadly as it could the political parties that were represented there.
So, Zuko, am I correct then, listening to you, to say that it had more to do with accommodation of these particular parties than efficiency and possibly the work that needs to be done?
The work that needs to be done is twofold, Bongas. The work that needs to the work that needs to be done is to ensure that there is political stability in South Africa. And in the context of the election results that we have, political stability hinges on cooperation broadly amongst all these political parties. So on that score, that decision had to be made in order to accommodate that political efficiency on the one side. The second issue is that it doesn't stand to reason that small means efficient. I don't know where we get this thing that under all circumstances, efficiency is measured in the context of size going downwards. In terms of the work that must be done, the efficiency will be tested by the capacity of the members of the executive to act in productive ways, and this must be realized in terms of the performance of the economy, the performance of government in service delivery, and so on. So it doesn't arise that merely by adding numbers you've compromised efficiency. It's a problematic logic to run on.
All right. And, just to change gears slightly before I let you go, there is, of course, that issue of the disciplinary hearing for former President Jacob Zuma. I see it's in 2 weeks' time. Others are saying that there's a foregone conclusion here because he's the leader of the MK party. So why do you still bother with these particular processes? How do you respond?
The ANC is an organization that believes absolutely in due process. The ANC's commitment to the rule of law, to the observation of the rules of natural justice, is an indispensable part of who we are. And that includes giving a fair hearing to a person that the broad public might assume is guilty as charged. In the ANC, no one is guilty until they've had a chance to have a case put against them and they be afforded an opportunity to state their side. So that process will be followed even in the context of the former president of the ANC, Jacob Zuma, and the verdict will be issued by the DC. Even in that context, and the point must be made, even once the verdict has been issued, people must not be bewildered if the member concerned exercises their right of appeal. And the ANC will entertain that right of appeal because its own constitution obliges us to entertain the right of appeal until finality. And on that front, the ANC observes the rules of natural justice internally as it would want to observe it in the context of the administration of justice, even in the Republic at large.
So, Zuko, given the recent developments, is it virtual or a physical sitting?
It's virtual. There's already been news reports the whole day that it's virtual, and then
I wanted to get it from the horse's mouth. So thank you so much for that.
And
finally, before you go, briefly, you are the incoming Deputy Minister of Trade and Industry and Competition. How are you feeling?
I'm feeling upbeat. I'm up to the challenge, but just also to make the point that I used to work in the Department of Trade and Industry, so it's almost like a homecoming for me. But I'm now returning in a much more senior role than when I left. So I'm looking forward to take up the challenge of recalibrating South Africa's industrial policy under the leadership of Minister Paxdale. And
I hope that we get to speak about some of your priorities then in our next conversation when you've been sworn in to see what happens now, what becomes some of the, the big priorities. But thank you so much for your time.
I'm available. Please invite me. Thank you very much.
Will do. Thank you so much. That is ANC acting spokesperson Zuko Godlimpi there. And of course, as you hear, now it's confirmed the sitting will be virtual. And of course, there's been some who were saying, is it going to be physical? Is it going to be virtual? And some reports suggesting that it could be virtual, but others saying maybe it could be just a physical, hearing, especially when it comes to the disciplinary hearing for former President Jacob Zuma.